Good morning, Annie. Do you think we should publish the Zoom keynote session student join-in link now to the WhatsApp group?
I think so. Most of them ask, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Copy link. How can I make it to a PDF? Okay, so let me make a document now and send it to people by email and WhatsApp. Xavier, please help me to put participants back to the waiting room. And I'm going to make many of you as co-host, so you can help to mute participants, okay, during the session.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning, everyone. This session is not yet started. It will start in 30 minutes, okay? Dear IB Dunia core team, shall I build a breakout room and we can have a discussion in the breakout room?
That would be
Great, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
And then let participants stay in the main room.
Yeah.
Let me see. Add room 2. Dunia core team. Yes. Assign.我靠，为什么 room 我为什么有个 room 2? Why do I have a room 1? Okay, IB Dunia, let's join the Dunia core team room.我能把 room 1关了吗？不是，我没整明白，我肯定设错了，我把你设成主持人了。Hello, IB Dunia core team. Can you please open your camera? And then I will find you in the group list and find you to, and I will assign you to the breakout room.
Good morning, Miss.
Good morning. So where is IB Dunia core team?
Do we need to join a particular breakout room, Miss? I do not have any idea, actually.
No need.
Okay, so we will join here, right?
Yes. So the keynote session introduction will happen soon. Okay, just give it a minute. Please keep waiting a little bit patiently, and the session will start soon.
Shall we try and do another breakout?
Do you want me to
Yeah,
make one?
what time?
Yeah, go for it, Aditya. Like, because that one failed. Everyone ended up going into it. So
Okay, so do you guys, what time is the session starts, may I ask?
8:15 onwards, we will set up things as soon as Avi joins and we've gone through with her.
Okay, so I'm going to do a breakout room, and then IB Dunia core team will go to the breakout room to discuss, and the participants who entered early, they can remain here, okay?
yeah.
Are you going to assign us or are you leaving it open to anybody to join?
Assign us to it would be the best plan, yeah?
And I'm just assigning people to the room. Do you want to make one yourself, or should I just assign people to the breakout room that's already made?
So currently, I cannot find, okay, I can find you guys now.
Okay.
Okay, so let me assign you to IB Dunia, okay? Let me assign. How to assign? Okay, let me first make everyone co-host, and then you can help to assign people to the breakout room. Gurpreet, you are co-host now. And is Rachel co-host? No,
Yeah.
Aditya Rao.
Aditya already invited in one of the backup room.
Okay, Aditya is a co-host already. So is Ani co-host?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can invite the IB Dunia core team that you know to the breakout room.
Yeah. Eric has gone there. Aditya, you do this with the list. Annie and I, we're also seeing this. So we'll go and we'll just join the breakout room and we'll just see this. That who all are missing, we'll just send a message to you in our WhatsApp group.
Okay, sounds good. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Ani, shall we go to the breakout room as well?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Udah nggak, mau makan punya kamu?
I just wish they didn't write. If they didn't write, it wouldn't be like a problem.
Kaya pala sabi ko, ba't wala akong marinig? Ito pala yun.
Me? Thank
Ano
you.
ba? Ano mo? Kaya pala sabi ko, ba't wala akong marinig? Ito pala yun.
Me? Thank
Ano
you.
ba? Ano mo? You're using.
Yeah. Okay.
and in-nya.
Ongoing, kan udah mulai. Ongoing, coba.
Sempurna academic record.
USB drive. Play by drive. Play by USB drive. Play by USB drive. Play by USB. Play by USB drive. YouTube. Play by USB drive. Bluetooth. No problem. Look at me.
Ini yang perlu diperhatikan adalah yang sampai putus obat dan juga yang kedua tetap melakukan
Right, so good morning and thanks for coming, everyone. This is Ram, I'm DP Network Chair. We welcome Ms Avalokita Nanda DP CP MYP Authorization Manager, Asia Pacific, the core team members, Fifi, Gurpreet, Adit, Devinder, Adolfo, Eric, Lenny, Adel, Sharad, Shaukat, all facilitators, participants from different IB board schools from this region, and last but not least, Classcipe team headed by Ian. We thank Ms Avalokita Nanda for the keynote session and all the facilitator for preparing their sessions in their busy time and presenting today. It's a great work. It's a very busy time in this semester.
Making some posters, you know what I mean?
In this today, more than 983 participants will be participating in the different breakout sessions. 47 presenters, they will be presenting their different sessions. And there will be different leaders from the different IB school will be attending this conference. It's a great achievement for us as a Dunia, a whole team. Organizing this magnitude of conference is not easy, as you know, that's the data says. But during this past week, we have observed that the teachers, they have worked as an ecosystem of learning, where all teachers and different members started working as a team and helping each other to learn and adopt this new platform, Classcipe platform. We have learned a lot and we will reflect certainly. And after that reflection, we will take the decision and we will progress further. And that's the whole inquiry cycle. And it is at the core of teaching and learning practices in the IB programs. I wish all of you happy learning sessions and all the best. Thank you. Now I pass to Ms Gurpreet to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms Avalokita Nanda, DP MYP Authorization Manager, Asia Pacific. Thank you, Ms Gurpreet.
Thank you so much, Param. May I request all the attendees, if you are not speaking, could you please mute your mic? Kind request, please mute your mic if you're not speaking. Thank you. It is such an honor to be able to introduce such a distinguished speaker among us. Ms Avalokita Nanda joined IB in 2012. Her role over the past 6 years in the authorization department has been to support IB candidate schools in their authorization journey. And may I add, personally, it is with passion that she does this. With 14 years of teaching and leadership experience in a 3-program school in India, she's also been part of the IB Educators Network since 2004. Prior to that, she was a university lecturer in sociology. Avi holds a master's degree in sociology from Pune, a master's in educational leadership and change from Hong Kong University of Education, and IB certificates in leadership practice and research. She is strongly committed to access to education for all. Over to Fifi.
Thank you, Ms. Gurpreet. So here is the rundown for today's event. So we are going to start later on the keynote speaker from 8:45 until 9:45. So it is an hour session. After that, there will be 15 minutes break before we reach the first session from 10 until 11. Then another 30 minutes break and continue with session 2, 11:30 until 12:30. Then lunch break for an hour from 12:30 until 1:30. And continue with the last session, session 3, from 1:30 until 2:30. That is the rundown for today's event. Thank you. Back to Yinan.
First of all, I want to thank IB Dunia for giving Classcipe a new platform, this opportunity to collaborate and I thank every participant for your patience, understanding, and risk taking in terms of exploring new things, exploring new technologies. So we are a edtech startup company based in New Zealand, and our aim is to enable the global educational resource to be accessible and shareable among the world. In a few years, our business mission is we can even enter the public and national schools in everywhere around the world and let them use Classcipe for free. Teachers and kids from everywhere can access amazing resources shared by educators like you. Thank you very much. And I hope everyone will enjoy this session. Please reach out to Classcipe team if you run into any problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Param, maybe.
Yeah, so I think we finished the welcome introduction a bit early. I think if Ms. Abby is ready, we can get going with the keynote session and we can finish a bit earlier before the first breakout session. Is that okay? So to Ms. Abby, we thank you again. We really honor and pleasure to have you here, right, and addressing us. So over to Ms. Abby for keynote session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ram and Gurpreet, for the lovely introduction. Thank you also to Inan for her support. This platform is new to me, but it looks very seamless indeed. And thank you to everyone who has joined, because it is wonderful to meet you all again. The last time I was in a session with you was 2 years ago in the height of the pandemic. And I absolutely do appreciate that you invited me. So moving on to the Classcipe site, do I just start, Inan? How does it work? You're on mute.
Ms. Avi, would you like me to share the screen, or you would like to share the screen?
Oh, I can. Oh, you have to share the screen. Fine, I'll share the screen. No problem. I wasn't quite understanding what to do. Can you just check that you're able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on one second.
Shall I share screen?
1 minute. No, let me do that. Okay, let me know if you can see the screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. I'm not sure what's happened here. Right. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And thank you for your time. I do appreciate that you're all very busy. This is a weekend, but still you've taken out the time for this excellent sessions that have been arranged for you through the Dunia network. I have been around the Dunia network for a while now, for many years, as I've been in the AIB since 2012. And I have seen the really great work that is happening with the teachers during all your conferences, as well as all the networking that takes place during your normal school years. Your theme for this year is really exciting. The fact that you're talking about changing course, transforming education, looking at so many different aspects of how to transform education, including the right to education and building a sustainable, inclusive, and peaceful future. And it is really my pleasure to be able to talk to you about a few things that were on my mind when I saw your conference theme. Just looking at the IB, many of you will be familiar with the IB mission statement, and you know that what we are trying to do in the IB is to work with schools, organizations. It's a little bit noisy. If you wouldn't mind turning yourselves on mute. Thank you. Yeah, so as you know, our organization works with schools, governments, and international organizations to develop the kind of programs that will help students to be active, compassionate, and lifelong learners. In the same time, it is also with teachers that we are working in order to be able to support this kind of a transition. And when you develop a theme such as transforming education, we hope that the IB is also going to be very much part of what you do, and the resources that we provide are going to be helpful. So what I'm trying to do in this particular session is to think about the big questions. look at how those big questions affect ourselves as people, as civil citizens, and as well as teachers in a classroom, and how that then impacts on our students. So what I would then like to do is to read a little bit about what our Director General, Mr. Olli-Pekka Heinonen, has spoken about. And this was in the International Schools Journal in 2022, at the beginning of 2022. So the IB is an old organization. As you all know, it started with a DP. But at the same time, we have changed and evolved over the time, taking on different programs. And many of you are teaching in programs that are not necessarily the DP. But it has now been 54 years. So are we still current is the question. And that is a constant question for us in the IB as well. And what Mr. Olli-Pekka Heinonen has said is that the challenges that we face today, though they may be very different from the founders 54 years ago, we have realized that we still need to change the world through education. And I know that every teacher here feels the same. For students to thrive and make a difference, we are called to engage in open, forthright conversations about what we teach and how we teach it. And when you're talking about an inclusive society, and when you are talking about making that change so that there is diversification in learning and that there is access as much as possible, we are also looking at those big goals that the world has set in front of us with regard to global warming, with regard to sustainability, with regard to inclusion, and so on. So what we teach and how we teach it becomes a really key part of what we do as teachers ourselves. It's also what we do in our own homes, and it's also how we act in society. So really, it's not about just yourselves as teachers, it's not about just yourselves as classroom practitioners, but it's also about people. What are we as people? And these are some very interesting aspects that have come out through studies by the OECD, through studies through the World Economic Forum, and many of you would have been aware of the research that is going on around them. So this is really just a reminder that there are resources out there. Please use them, and please think about how they impact on your life and how they impact on the life of your students. So when he sees how we teach, what we teach, and how we can help our students become those agents of change. So the change is in our hands. When we are talking about transforming education as you are today, we are saying that yes, we can transform education, and the students can transform the world, as so can we. So it is really what we're hoping to do, is to create that confidence and that agency as teachers for our students. I'd like to draw your attention now. First and foremost, I'd love congratulating you on the conference theme is how I've started. So really, I think it's fantastic that you're thinking so far ahead about what education could look like. But I would like to draw your attention to this really interesting website. If you haven't seen it before, it's the Strategic Intelligence World Economic Forum website. And what it helps you to do is you can go in and you can look at different themes in which there are published academic journals or most current information. And you can also see how these themes interact with other themes. So for example, I just picked up here Indonesia, because we're all based now in Indonesia. We're looking at how some of those things are going to affect our teaching and learning in Indonesia. And it also thinks about, okay, where can I get the resources for this information? Students who are at the diploma level, for example, may need some things which are more academic. Students who are in the MYP, the PYP can certainly be helped by your referring to some of this information. So if we look at Indonesia as a whole, and then start looking at education, skills, and learning. So on this screenshot, you can actually see some of the big questions that are coming up and some of the big initiatives that are coming up within Indonesia, as it works as a government, and it also works with its international partners. So looking at lifelong learning pathways, looking at relevant continuing education, looking at digital fluency, education and innovation, core soft skills, quality basic education. And then when you go around the entire circle, you can see that there are many other areas in which Indonesia also is doing some work. So please have a look at these sites. Obviously, the links are there for you, and I can share them with you later on if you want. It will be giving you some insights into how you can structure your learning in your classrooms, but it can also think about how would I approach some of these areas in my own schools. here, I would like you to just think a little bit and pause and possibly just put some comments into the chat box. The question I'm asking here is, you've spoken in your teacher conference about sustainability. And obviously, there are going to be some areas of sustainability that you're most concerned about, or some initiatives that you're already doing in your schools. So could you just maybe type in a few words to say where of these sustainable development goals are you thinking about as you work within your classrooms? And are there some initiatives that you're doing on your own? Or is there something that your school has focused on during this time? So just maybe 2 minutes for you to put in some information in the chat.
Dear all participants, Ms. Avi is waiting for you to put comments, text type of replies in your student window. Yes, I see Firdaus just give an answer. Yeah, not the chat box in the Zoom. Yeah.
Fantastic. I can see quality education, sustainable environment. Thank you so much, Louisiana and Nuzuriel Anur. I really appreciate your thinking. And these are some of the very major areas that we are thinking of course. How do we provide that quality education? What is the government doing to support quality education? How is international organizations involved in it? How are we working in our schools to provide that quality education? Charity work also, yes, indeed. Climate change is the big one for sure. Reduce the inequalities and the gender inequalities. Yes, we will be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation. And I absolutely agree that when we are talking about inclusion, we are talking about inclusion of everybody. And it's important to know, how do we change our mindsets and how do we change our approach to make sure that we are including everybody. I'll just wait for 1 second here to see if anything else is coming up, but I do appreciate that you've actually captured most of the key areas that we would be discussing during this presentation. And I do encourage you to have these conversations in your teacher groups and later on when you go back into school as well, as you discuss some of these areas. So the ones that I'm going to be focusing on today are quality education, a little bit about sustainability, and certainly about inclusion. And these are just some thoughts, some ideas, because already you are already working on so much of this, so that I can't direct you specifically to, oh, you should be doing this. That's not the point. The point is, let's think together. Let's think about where we can collaborate, and let's think about how we can surface some of these areas so that we understand them better. And how can the IB support you in doing that? So right to education, then we talked about quality education, but we are also focusing a lot on right to education. So what do we mean when we talk about right to education? If you could just maybe, just for a minute or so, just try and put in what you think right to education means in the chat. Am I on the wrong slide, Inan?
Yes, this slide is not, didn't have.
It's not for chat. Okay, sorry, apologies. I'm still learning. Yeah. So yes, so then let me just talk a little bit about what I was thinking about right to education. Then I'll ask you in the next slide to put in what you feel it means. So for example, the World Bank has spoken about learning poverty, in which it basically says that for the large portion of our students across the world, not being able to access at the age of 10 a suitably created reading material for that age group, not being able to read age-specific information, is learning poverty. There is also the knowledge gap, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. In our schools, we're working very hard to bridge that knowledge gap. The knowledge gap is the fact that disadvantaged communities, disadvantaged people will have less possibilities of gaining knowledge because they don't have access to the schools, or they don't have access to the tools, or they don't have access to the materials. So what is that knowledge gap, and how is that knowledge gap? How do we perceive that knowledge gap in our own schools and in our own daily lives? Then thinking about the reading proficiency. We're all familiar with learning stages, reading proficiency across our schools, especially in the PYP and in the MYP. So those are some of the areas that the World Economic Forum, as well as the World Bank has been looking at with regard to right to education across Asia Pacific. And of course, there are many initiatives that are taking place through the Asian Development Bank, for example, and as well as through various organizations in order to support schools. Here for others, for the case in Indonesia, in particular, the Indonesian government is also looking at people who are marginalized from mainstream education, people in rural areas, ethnic, religious, linguistic minorities, and so on. How do you approach the teaching for groups who do not have the same experiences as we might have in our own international schools? So thinking through that, international or national schools for that example. So essentially what we're thinking about is that divide. And I think somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, we're talking about those inequalities that take place. What can we do as teachers in our schools with the IB in order to be able to support and extend our access to these schools? So I do encourage you also to look at the ADB website and have a look at what is being done currently in Indonesia and also in your own countries. You can use the Strategic Intelligence website as well to check up on your own country if you would like to do that, to see, okay, what kind of information do we have? What data is there? And please use that data as you are talking to your students, because this is now data that is well curated. So we know that, you know, if we're not giving information that may be in some ways incorrect. So moving to the next slide, and this is where I would like you to share. Thank you so much, Inan. What do we mean here? So in Indonesia, there is that initiative to leave no one behind. It means prioritizing people's dignity and placing the progress of the most marginalized and vulnerable. So the people who are at the edge, somebody who is marginalized is somebody who is not in the mainstream, is not automatically able to access education, who may be in a remote area, who may be in a tribal area, who may have just because of their economic circumstances, they may have to work very early and not be able to access education. So they're looking at the marginalized and the vulnerable communities first. And this has become much more important since COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 has affected us very deeply. The very fact that we're working on online platforms such as this, the earlier Dunia conferences used to be face-to-face. I remember attending them. So, you know, we have transition, but at the same time, we have the privilege to transition. We have access behind us. We have some sort of finance behind us so that we can do this. What happens to the people who do not have that access? And that is what I'd really like us all to be thinking about. How are we sensitizing our students to these areas? And what are we doing to actually do something about this, right? And the whole idea is to ensure inclusive education and lifelong learning for all of us. So once again, please do have a look at the UN website. It talks about some of these access agendas that are taking place within Indonesia. The government and the UN is collaborating with each other in order to do this. And I just love some of the comments that have come up. Education should be for all, irrespective of caste, religion, or economical status. Everybody should have access to education, regardless of their background and status. And these are great thoughts. But the question is how? And this is not the place for solutions. This is the place to think about these things and say, what can I as an individual do in order to be able to support this, right? How I as a teacher, what should I be doing to spread this understanding that all the students in my class, even though they may be differentiated in many different ways, are not necessarily the ones to whom we should be looking at for targeting, to thinking about, okay, how do we bring them into the education experience that our students are having? So these are just thoughts, right? Fundamental rights for all to receive education. Fabulous, Sita, thank you so much. And also fundamental rights to receive education and have access, Joshua, thank you. So yes, I mean, we're all thinking about these things, but sometimes in our busy work, in our daily life, in the fact that we're working with our schools and we have so many things to do and deadlines to meet and things to mark, we sometimes can lose sight of these areas. And this is a good time, even for myself, and particularly for myself, to remind myself that, yes, these are the important questions. This is what we should be focusing on as teachers. So moving on, I spoke a little bit about COVID and the effects beyond, but some of the things that have impacted have been school closures on the poorer students. We've seen this across the world. We've seen this in India. It has happened in Indonesia, we know, but it has happened everywhere where the school closures have impacted poorer students and they've impacted girls, because where we wanted to be, we would have to immediately move online. People who didn't have devices or did not have the right connectivity, there was no way that they were going to be able to access education. And then bringing those students back to a level where they can feel safe and they can start learning again has taken months, sometimes even the entire year. So of course, we are talking about all the lost learning and all of those catchphrases that you're seeing everywhere. But the point is that there have been certain groups that have been affected more than others. So, and also the fact that the HDI index has declined for 2 years in a row. And what it has all created is that even though we were aware of it from before, we already know that we are working in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, a VUCA world. The COVID has certainly made that much clearer to us, that there are no certainties, right? And this kind of uncertainty complex has created an unsettling feature in the lives of people the world over. And so for the first time, we've had this HDI decline. And what I would really like us to think about for the next slide, and there is a little time for reflection on this as well, but I would like to read this to you. This is from Achim Steiner. He's a UNDP administrator, and he was writing in the UNDP website. Again, I have given you the link there for you to have a look at. And his main point is the people are the real worth of nations. We talk about GDP. We talk about so many other different things to be able to measure how well we are doing, how successful we are. But essentially, what he's saying is people are the real wealth of nations. And we mediate this. That means we communicate this. We have interrelationships with this by looking at our governments, by working with our governments, by looking at our natural environment. So this is about the sustainability piece. How sustainable is what the things that we're doing? How sustainable is it the way that we are living, for example, and also with each other. So if we have the wealth of nations, how do we relate to each other? And this is where slowly we are going to come into the inclusion piece, right? How do we accept and understand each other and make space for each other? It becomes very important. So each new crisis that comes on reminds us when people's capabilities, choices, and hopes for the future are feeling dashed, right? So when you think of your local entrepreneur who's depending on his daily bread for the work that he does every single day, suddenly closed down because of COVID. And this, we've seen so many of those cases across. You can see them on YouTube. You can see how people have transcended it, but you also know that a lot of people have failed, and not just in developing countries, everywhere in the world, right? So their hopes for the future feels dashed, and the well-being of the nation. So COVID itself was a health risk for everybody, but also on the whole, the sense of well-being that we all have, you've dealt with that with your students as well, has also diminished. And then what is happening with our planet as well. So all of these things are creating a lot of anxiety, and it's creating anxiety for ourselves. We are thinking constantly about, how are we going to make ends meet? How are we going to make sure that we are safe? How can we make sure that our families are safe? And at the same time, it's impacting other people who are more disadvantaged than us even more. And so this year, the report, which is, and I invite you to have a look at it, asks us to look at ossified or like set in stone, oversimplified ideas that we have about human decision-making. What he's asking us to do is to say, when humans make decisions, they are not linear. They're not always rational. They're mostly not rational, in fact. And a lot of our learning, of all of the education research that we have is also around that you learn best when you have an emotion attached to it, right? So we're saying that our decision-making is not rational because we have our own emotions, we have our own biases, that means our own perspectives and our own ways of thinking because of who we are as our identities and our sense of belonging. Where do we belong, right? When there were school closures, you suddenly were not able to go into a school anymore. What did that mean for you? There would have been anxiety. You might have gone through it. You might have said, okay, I just have to keep going. And you would have had support from your schools, etc., to make that happen. But at the same time, that anxiety is still there. And it's there for all of us, right? We were all worried about ourselves, our families elsewhere in the world, if they were not in the same country, or you couldn't get to them because of closures. So all of this has affected us, and we have to recognize that. We have to recognize that it has affected our colleagues, and it has affected our students, and it has affected, in general, the well-being in the world. And particularly the fact that that index is telling you that there has been a loss of sense of well-being makes you also believe that, yes, there's something we need to do. So when you think about people are the real wealth of nations, if you were to think and reflect about how do I develop this wealth of nations then, what do you think your first action could be? I noticed that I already seen that there has been some agreement about the opinions on the chat box, and there's also the CAS component for sure. It is going to come up later on as well. But anything else that you think as an individual, if I am going to believe or honor the fact that people are the real wealth of nations, what would be my first action today? And I'd like to give you about 2 or 3 minutes to reflect on this.
Wow.
I love that, yeah. Spreading kindness, caring for students holistically, for sure. Yes, we can start to make the change. Yes, empower. Now, this is an important word, to have agency, to be able to empower. Thinking about within your own school context, how you can do this, not only just for your students, but also for yourselves. Indeed, we can do collaboration. Yes, collaboration is very, very important. Everyone is precious. Now, this is a wonderful idea. Everyone is precious. If we can keep that in our minds, it helps us to become compassionate beings. It helps us not to worry too much about the things that are going wrong, but rather that we can all work together to resolve this, making people understand that they're not isolated. Yes. Thank you so much for your responses. And I do hope that you'll carry these conversations on further on during the day and later on as well. So coming back then to the right to education, I just wanted to set a little bit of context with regard to what is already happening in Indonesia. And then thinking about what your roles might be in your schools to make sure that your students are aware of this, and maybe looking at some ways in which you can be engaged with it. So Indonesia, as we know, has done a fabulous job in becoming very close to universal basic education. So education is available to a large number of the population. However, the priorities now are to raise that quality of education and also to widen the participation. So when I was speaking about the marginalized groups and the remote islands across Indonesia and the fact that there are so many different people who need to access, I think mobile technology has been used to a huge extent in order to be able to support, but also, of course, there is still problems of access there. And then it is to increase the efficiency. That is making sure that there is a more data-driven approach to resource allocation, better tailoring of provision to local needs, and stronger performance management. So support for teachers as well, support for the schools themselves, and trying to gather the data of how students are performing as well. And this is a collaboration between OECD and the Asian Development Bank with the government of Indonesia. So I'm sure you will see some of this information either in the news or it will be available for you on site. It will be there in Bahasa as well. So of course, so please do refer to it in Bahasa so that you are able to also get as much as you can from those reports so that you can bring that back into your classrooms at the relevant time. So the focus is the development of human capital. So when we're talking about people are the wealth of nations, we are using those terms, human capital, right? When we talk about capital, normally it means money. Here also it does mean money in the point of view of not just productivity, but support structures and the ability to include as many of your entire population. We are focused in schools on our young people. And we sometimes think about ourselves as teachers. What we are really trying to do is to expand that, to young people, teachers, older people, people who may have a retirement age but still have a lot to contribute to society. And how do we include all these people in that human capital, right? And many countries are working on those areas now. For example, in Singapore, there is a big focus now on giving access to older people who may have already retired in order to do very useful jobs that are available, and so on. So countries are considering that as part of their economic development now, and it is important that we also consider it from our point of view. For example, we may have access to people in the community who could be very supportive of education in our schools. You know, in the IB, we already asked you to look at your local context and making use of local resources. Maybe there are older people who could help. Maybe there are other people who would be able to contribute. So thinking about that and providing access for them to be able to enter the educational framework. So some of those areas that Indonesia is specifically focusing on is the relevance of education to employment. So the education that is being received in the national schools, that education should be at a stage where the students are able to go into employment. They're looking at improving of STEM, the science, technology, etc. They're looking at the teacher support. There's also a bigger focus now on early childhood, and that is going to be a thrust coming up. And then the one roof, when we're talking about accessing marginalized communities, etc., the one roof was the basic and the secondary education, which comes under one school system. Focus again on higher education, on technical and vocational training. For example, some of your schools now have the CP, the career-related program, and that has partnered with local technical and vocational education programs in the higher education areas. Bringing the employers in to be thinking about how do we contribute to maybe creating modules or creating understanding of what the students are bringing into the employment sector once they graduate. So all of that kind of conversation is happening now within the scene in Indonesia. Also, education reform based on students in financial, social circumstances, and the flexibility between academic and vocational tracks. This is very exciting because you can see that in some countries in the world where students could enter an educational pathway, and then because of other circumstances, they might choose to take a job. They are qualified enough to take that job, but then they want to come back into the education system after a few years. And that is allowed, and that is possible. For example, we see this in Australia. However, this does not happen so much in many of our countries. But in Indonesia, there is that focus now, that students should be able to enter, gain some credentials, get a job, go back into the education system, and so on. So this is very forward thinking. And I think for us in our schools also, this is something to be considering to a large extent. And of course, then the government and the international organizations are working on the finance side of that as well. So what is it for me? Because this is all very broad strokes. It's happening across the world. People are doing all of this thing. So if we're talking now about sustainability, so we talked a little bit about the right to education. We talked about potential roles that we could have, or at least certain stances or certain approaches that we have. We believe that everyone should have a right to education, for example. What do we mean then with how does that then become sustainable? Or how do we move that into the sustainability bucket, if you like? When you're talking about sustainability, there are many pillars of sustainability. When you look at them online or when you look at them through your resources, you'll find that there are 4 pillars, 5 pillars, 11 pillars, as many pillars as possible of sustainability. But really, when you're thinking about it, to make something sustainable, you're looking at the environmental impact, or how is it impacting on the environment? You're looking at how does it impact on the economy, and then the social impact. What is the impact on people downstream of those ideas that you have for sustainability? What is the impact on yourself as well? So, and those social relationships become extremely important when we're discussing anything to do with sustainability. So what I would like us to do in this slide is to think about where do you think your focus would be with regard to sustainability? If you wanted to sustain any initiative, it doesn't have to be for climate change, any initiative at all, where would your focus be? Would it be on the environment? Would it be on economy, or would it be social? I think I can see a very good spread across for environmental, social, and economic. And I would encourage you to have those conversations. Why? Why do you think that the social is more important? Why do you think the economic is more important? Why do you think that the finance is more important? And these are great conversations to have within your classrooms as well, because you can really develop, put people into groups. You can ask them to support one particular idea. You can bring them together. You can, have a jigsaw, get them to discuss with each other, and you could put in any initiative. You could take something off, some of the resources that have been shared here. It could be part of the lesson planning that you do. It is very important because over time, we begin to understand that they're all linked. And unless you have the social relationships, it is very difficult to have change. So when we talk about agency, when we talk about creating areas where we can have that change, unless there is the social interactions and the social relationships, it is impossible to make a change. Because in the end, it's about that messy way of working that individuals have, the messy way in which we make decisions based on our emotions, based on whether we feel we belong or not, based on so many other factors that impact subconsciously on the way that we think. Thank you very much for those answers. I really appreciate that. So let's take it to our schools then. If we're talking about sustainability, it could be part of right to education as well. What role would your school play? And again, I'd like you please to think about some of those prompts which are on the left-hand side, but at the same time, maybe share something that your school is already doing for sustainable action. Or think about how are you creating awareness through the curriculum? What action component might be there in your programs that is helping to create the sustainable mindset? How are you reaching out to your communities? Where are you linking up the sustainable development goals? What kind of professional learning might be happening in your school? Are you having teacher collaborative sessions, or is there some discussion around this? Is your school asking you to do some extra training in order to be able to understand this better? And again, that whole question about empowerment. I love the fact that the learner profile has come up, Gurpreet. Thank you so much for that. The learner profile attributes is the IB mission in action. So, maybe moving through that. This is not only to think about how the IB can support, but you may have other initiatives as well that you're not actually thinking about as being IB, but when you bring it together, it is actually something that we would promote. So please do think about these things. And maybe these are some of the questions that you could take back to your schools, or you could take back into your discussions today to say, okay, so what exactly is our school role? Our school is playing? Is there something else that we could be doing? Maybe looking through how we can create more awareness through our curriculum. Are there some action components, services action in MYP, or something in CAS that we could enhance in order to make sure that this awareness is being spread and also that some action is being taken? Are we actually making a difference? Are our students making a difference? So thinking along those lines can be really very helpful. But thank you very much for all of your contributions here. So for sustainability, I just wanted to make you aware. This is on it's on the ADB website. It is about an initiative that has taken place in Lampung province about providing access for water in all the bathrooms in the schools, and how people are getting involved in doing that, including local, possibly older people. They are helping with this, not just in schools, but across the whole of Lampung province. Please do check out some of the initiatives that are taking place within Indonesia, and do please, sort of surface them for your students to understand that, there's so much good work that is happening right there And we are constantly talking about local to global, right, in our IB programs. So thinking about, okay, this is happening there. Is there something happening in my neighborhood? Is there something that we can tap into? Is there something that we can fundraise to contribute to? Please think about all of these areas in where we are creating a more inclusive society. Because this is sustainability, but it is also inclusion. Having water in bathrooms at a time of COVID basically means that their whole community is safer. At the same time, it helps girl children to be able to access the schools, because otherwise they might have to stay home on certain days. It helps in so many different ways. So just that one thing, water in the bathroom all the time. How do we make that happen? Who do we energize in the community to allow that to happen also? So please do consider these things and think about them as movements. As we come to the end of the presentation, I'll be talking about a little bit of an IE movement that I hope that you'll all get involved in as well. But think about these things as we can all contribute. We can all do something. We can make sure that change happens. So for change to take place, there are various agents of change. But of course, one of them very critical is government and the funding that happens around that change. What policies are made in order for that change to take place? What kind of support structures would be like the initiatives that governments have? There are international organizations. I've already talked about the ADB, I've talked about the UN, I've talked about World Economic Forum and their reports based on some of the changes that are taking place developmentally, what kind of advice they provide. So for example, many of these initiatives within Indonesia itself are happening. And if you just check the ADB website, click on Indonesia, click on education, you will see a huge number of initiatives that are coming up within Indonesia. You can do the same for your own countries. So, just have a look. It helps you, and it helps to give that kind of global perspective for your students as well, when they see that similar ideas and similar ways of working, similar patterns are emerging across the world. Then, the civil society. We are part of civil society. So what is our stance on some of these things that take place? What do we stand for? What is some ethical dilemmas that may come up when we are supporting sustainable action, right to education, etc. And what is our stance on that? What do we believe becomes very important. And it is important as a teacher group to reflect on that. What do we stand for in our schools when we are talking about sustainability, when we are talking about right to education, when we are talking about inclusion? And this is how we will do things from now on. It's a great action point to take forward in your schools. And obviously you'll have these conversations with your school leaders. There will be, and this is not something that happens overnight, but it is worth thinking about. What do I believe in? What do I stand for? How would I like to act? So both civil society and individuals come together in the same way. How should we do things is the question that we should be asking ourselves. Here, again, it's a point of reflection. What is our role as a civil society? We talked a little bit about what civil society means. What is our role as an organization? As our school, what is our role? We are an organization, right? And now we'll be talking about, in a little while, some conversations around organizations as houses. This is a really great speaker that we had recently in the 2020 virtual conference who spoke about this and made us think about how do we treat our organization and how do we treat people who come into our organization. Then we think about what is our role as educators. And please do spend some time to reflect on that. And then what is our role as individuals as we interact with all these people whom, in this presentation at least, we have thought about as human capital. And we have thought of them as wealth of nations. So what is our relationship to them? Let's spend a little bit of time thinking about that. So here, we're now moving into the inclusion space. And please think about what are our assumptions and biases. I will explore this a little bit later so that maybe we can start thinking about what do we mean by an assumption? What do we mean by a bias? But also it's important to think like, what are the quick judgments that we make when you meet a person for the first time? What are some of the clues that you're looking for? What are some of the ways that you know whether you like a person, you want to talk to them, you don't want to talk to them. And this is very personal now. I'm asking you to think about this because that's the basis of where our inclusivity comes in. That's where we start. And we all have biases and assumptions, every single one of us. And it definitely affects the way that we interact with people. The interesting thing is that we can teach ourselves not to let those affect our behaviors. And that's the main point, right? So please do think, what are some of our assumptions? What are some of the stereotypes that we have in our brains about people, about things, about technology? I have huge stereotypes about technology. If Inan had not been there, I would not have been able to manage this whole thing. I would have said, oh my God, I don't know this platform. I am not going to be able to do it. I will be a failure. You know, so what are some of those beliefs that we have, right? Let's think about those. You're welcome to share on the chat, but you're also welcome to share privately because this can be quite deep. So I'll just give you 2 minutes maybe, just to think about it, maybe write something, a little space for reflection here. Yeah. That cross-culture communication. It's important, you know, you sometimes think, how deep do I want to go? I can understand somebody's food. I can understand somebody's festivals. I can understand somebody's fashions. But do I want to go deeper than that into the under iceberg? I think many of you would be already familiar about how culture is that depth of the iceberg, which we possibly never even tap. Any other thoughts? Just 1 more minute. Awareness raising, for sure. I love that, Jerica. We are facilitators for change, right? So all of us have got shared beliefs and norms, and based on our identities, we think about things from a particular perspective based on our ethnicity, where we were born, how we grew up, what kind of experiences we had around us, and those become so much of a background that we don't even think about them. It's only when our shared beliefs and norms are not shared by somebody else that we may meet or may not be depicted in the same way in the classroom that we feel a sense of tension. And it's really about those pieces of tension that I would like us to think about, those areas of tension that I would like you to think about, in order to be able to maybe surface some of those and say, oh, why am I behaving this way? Maybe I should be thinking about it in a different way. So I would encourage you to think about some of the stereotypical images we may have about people or about a particular group of people. We might, some things that we may say, oh, for example, I mean, this is a very cute story that I can share because it's my own personal example. I have a very dear friend here in Singapore. We've worked together for the longest time. And every single time we go out for a meal, she will tell me, oh, all of this is vegetarian. And I look back at her and say, you know, I'm not vegetarian. So the assumption is, this lady is Indian. She has to be vegetarian, right? So how do we bridge that over, and how do we make that happen in such a way that we can understand each other in a much deeper way? This is quite superficial, but it's also very cute because what that lady is trying to do is to protect me from all the stuff that I should not be having because I happen to be vegetarian. But I'm not vegetarian. I want to eat those things, you know. So those are some of the funny things that can happen when you have cultural assumptions. But there are also deeper assumptions, and you know, I'd like you very much to reflect on those as you go on. So moving on then. Sorry, where am I? Sometimes I talk too much.
You are on slide number 16, and we can go to...
Yeah, all right. So now here I would like to direct your attention to the Human Systems Dynamic Institute. The IP is working quite closely with them in a number of areas, particularly when we're looking at how we do things in the workplace. And some of the things that I would like to raise your awareness to is the fact that there are a number of different biases that we may have. Some of those biases can be removed through organizational change. So everything that is on the left-hand side of this column is about things that the organization can do. Affirmative action means making sure that groups that are disadvantaged or maybe not in so much of a number in your classrooms or in your school are given some special support in order to allow them to come forward. Sensitivity is just about what we were talking about earlier, just understanding the other person's perspective, the other person's culture, knowing that some things happen in a certain way, knowing that, for example, there will be some festive seasons where there are certain behaviors, etc., and making sure that everybody in the classroom knows that and we celebrate together and so on. Making ourselves more aware of that bias, which comes up, is a deeper area, but that can also happen in organizations where they can help us to become more aware and surface our bias. Codes of conduct, how do we behave inside our schools? How do we behave with our students, for example? And then what are the policies? Like, for example, the IB asks for all those policies in order to be able to implement and to be able to direct how schools will work in the classrooms. So what do your policies look like? It's a very good way of looking to see whether or not you are an inclusive work environment or an inclusive school. So I would encourage you to know a little bit more about the structural areas that are taking place in your schools. But then the relational ones, because we keep talking about how relationships are the most important thing. So when we see each other in meaningful ways, when we see each other in ways that go beyond some of the irritations that we have with each other because we happen to be slightly different from each other, and how do we adapt that, and how do we make that action become something that is going to support us in our behaviors to each other? So the Human Systems Dynamics Institute has helped us to see something called pattern spotting. The pattern spotting is I can understand this from this perspective. However, there is another perspective, which is on a continuum. And how do I move my beliefs across the continuum so that I become much more inclusive? And this is a very interesting exercise. I would encourage you to go to the website. It's free. You can use some of the activities there and start thinking about how you could use that in your own schools as well. So the main thing that I'm talking about with inclusion is that we should be looking at where are we comfortable? We are comfortable with certainty about certain things, about certain behaviors, about certain actions, about certain things that happen and certain things that must happen in our classroom. And then the other side of that is uncertainty. How far are we able to go along that slider to uncertainty in order to be able to accommodate other people who have their differences, right? This is an interesting exercise once you start creating those relational divisions between what we consider from one perspective and what we consider from another perspective. So I do encourage you to think about that. So as we go on, I would like you to take some time, maybe have a look at some of these videos that I've got, have a look at Roy Gluckman's website itself. He talks about organizations as houses. If your organization was your house, what are the rules? Do you know those rules very well? Are there some people who know those rules better than you? When a student comes into your school as a house, does the student know those rules? Or is it something very unfamiliar to them? Or is it something that they have never experienced before in their lives? So basically what Roy Gluckman is saying, and he says it quite vocally, is that very often organizations are created around a very Western-centric model. And many of our students who come from different backgrounds don't get it. That's not the way they behave in their houses, right? Whereas the school house for a Western person may be that house which the school is being created as. And so maybe those rules and ways of behavior, etc., are very, very different for a student who comes in from a different culture, from a different background, from a different ability for access. So if we start to think about your school as a house, you start thinking, okay, what are the rules here? How do we do things? Is there something we can change that will help to make it easier for our colleagues and make it easier also for our students? And those are really good first questions to ask each other because they're very simple questions. but they also can allow you to go really deep. So I would encourage you to consider that. The other thing that Roy Gluckman has really raised is, what is privilege? When I spoke about our schools having access, our students having more access than other students, we are already coming from a position of privilege. We're already coming from a stage where we say, okay, we actually have more than somebody else who has less, right? So when your student or yourself as a teacher in your school has that level of privilege, we don't think about it. You know, we say, oh, when I say something, people listen to me. Your voice is automatically legitimized. But in our classrooms, or even in our teacher meetings, maybe we can be asking, if I say something, are people listening to me? And if they're not listening to me, why are they not listening to me? Who can I go to raise this area? And the same thing in your classroom. One student whom you consider maybe very naughty and says something, do you automatically listen to him or do you not? Or her, right? Or are you more concerned that, okay, they should stay quiet and follow the lesson, right? And look, I have done the same thing in my own life. So this has been a huge reflection for me as well. Am I legitimizing my students' voices, all my students' voices? Am I listening to them, or am I acting on what they're saying or behaving, right? This is a really important, and his presentation was great. There's a lot of YouTube videos that he has got. I suggest you have a look at them. They can be a bit blunt, so be prepared for that. But at the same time, it's very good learning. I keep losing the plot here. Okay, so here. So this is then just a point of reflection. How do we take this into our classrooms? We've talked about the structure. These are some of the things you're probably already doing, right? You're sensitizing your students to other students who may come in. They may have learning access issues. They may have language access issues. They may be, having certain food biases, that there are some food restrictions because of their health, etc. You might be helping them in a lot of different ways. You'll be sensitizing your students to say, this particular student will need your help. Can you support them, etc., etc. And you'll be doing that automatically in your classroom, right? Your lesson planning can also sensitize. It will create the structure. The way that you lesson plan to make sure that you're including differentiation, that you're including diversity and inclusion issues. Looking at your school as a house again is like, if a student, for example, has a fall and breaks a bone, do they have access to all the classrooms? So what are the rules there? So thinking about all of those kinds of things. Policies I've already explained. Within your classroom, again, you'll be doing different kinds of grouping. What sort of grouping are you doing to include as many students with each other as possible? What sort of assessment practices do you have? Now, with the MYP, the PYP, and the DP, there is also, the ability for students to demonstrate their learning in many different ways. So, how are you integrating that, making sure that all of your students are able to access some sort of assessment that is going to be helpful for them to demonstrate their learning? Approaches to learning, you're very familiar with approaches to teaching as well. And then the professional learning. So I did ask that question before as well. What sort of professional learning is taking place in your schools to help you to be able to understand inclusivity and how to include students more? And then thinking about student capacity, right? Students themselves are able to work in this area. If you are able to give them agency, they're also able to surface some of these areas where they may not feel included, where they may not feel that they have a voice. And then on the other side is the relational aspects. What associations are being made? What kind of things do we associate with maybe diversity, with inclusion, and so on? How can we change our assumptions on that? What sort of patterns of thinking are developing? How much can we go deeper into our interactions? We're all very busy at schools, but you can also take this back to your home. You can think about, okay, how are my interactions in my own home happening? And how can I make those deeper, better, more compassionate? Is a great way to think about it. And then the use of inquiry. Yeah, you're using inquiry in your classrooms the whole time. You can use inquiry in your relationships as well, right? And again, the Human Systems Dynamics Institute has been very helpful in giving us 2 or 3 points that are really helpful in thinking about how are we looking at this issue, problem, situation, right? Turning your judgment into curiosity. Very often we see something and say, oh, that person's out to get me. And that's my judgment, right? But if I can change that into curiosity, why is that person doing this thing in this way? Why is this organization has this particular rule? Let me try and find out. The moment I turn it into curiosity, I can ask really good questions. and things can get resolved. Turning defensiveness into reflection. Oh, this is the way we've already always done this. This is the way my classroom works. I don't want any changes. However, there is opportunity for reflection. Why do I want it this way? What is it that I'm trying to gain with this? Is there something I could be doing better? Can I ask my colleagues to help me? Could we arrange some walk-ins and some discussions that will help us to think about how things could be done better? And can we reflect together? Now, do remember that for all of these things, you have to have a safe space. If you feel threatened, you're not going to be able to reflect. But if you have a community of practice that is working together on all of these things, then of course, you are able to do this much better. Turning your assumptions into questions. So what are the assumptions? What do I automatically assume when I read a policy or I meet with a colleague who has got a different perspective on something? How do I turn those into questions, right? So these are some really great tools, and I do invite you to have a look at the website. It's really quite helpful. And you can really think about your own practice, your own relationships, your own behaviors, and then again, how that extends beyond into your school and then into the wider community. Very quickly now, because I don't have my eye on the time and I think I might be going over, I would just like us to look back at some of the resources that the IB has provided for diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are just some statements that have come out from the DI framework that is there on it is on the public website. And these are some of the statements that relate to teaching and learning. There are also statements there about the organization as a whole. So alongside our community, we will work to protect the environment and local ecosystems. The IB will foster a sense of agency and inquiry in both the people we work with and the young people we help to educate. And of course, your role in that is huge because you are carrying that inquiry forward into your classrooms. We embrace learner variability. So when I was talking about the house, the school is a house. To what extent does the rules in your house allow for learner variability? And is there something that maybe could be discussed and changed, or something could be transformed? So we want our stakeholders to develop and thrive in a culture of equal opportunities for learning, personal growth, and developing the ability to make positive change. And this is not just for the students, it's also for the teachers. So you are very much part of that thinking for the IB. Then to act supportively and in consideration for young people affected by difficult or adverse circumstances. And as we've seen a little bit in the presentation and in your own experience, we have all experienced difficult and adverse circumstances, but there are also particular accommodations that are made through the IB, as everyone who's in the DP is aware of, and also in the MYP. So, do please make use of some of those things to support your learners. And we will work to promote voices, identities, and leadership of marginalized people. So once again, we are very firmly behind some of those initiatives that have been done by countries by themselves, by governments by themselves, by international organizations, by the Sustainable Development Goals, and so on. And we are also constantly, as you know, developing our programs to be able to support. If you start looking at MYP a little bit in the future, the enhancing of the MYP information is there on the program communities. You will see a lot more of our curriculum focused around diversity, equity, inclusion as well. Please do use those support structures when they come through. So really then, how are we supporting inclusion? It's in our curriculum documentations. I just spoke about the MYP. There is a lot in PYP as well. There's a lot coming up through conceptual inquiry in the DP. The IB Guide to Inclusive Education, we do encourage everyone to access that so that you're aware. And maybe some of those questions can be then taken back into your teacher meetings to think about. Please look at the self-review framework. It's going to come up now. And also within the stance and practices, everything that we talk about is about how we can support sustainability and inclusion, as well as the right to education. So this is just a reminder of the self-review framework. You will find it on the PRC. Please do make use of it if you haven't done it before. It is about looking at inclusive education in your schools. So this one is just the first bit, but I would invite you to type in some answers about to those questions. How and to what extent have we as a school community defined inclusion? What is our definition of inclusion? How have we considered and addressed our understanding of diversity and equity? So there is a little bit of reading to do around that if you'd like to. Again, it's on the PRC. It's also available on many websites that speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also thinking about just that simple question: how do I do it in my house? If my school was the house, how do I do it? So any answers that you may have, and if you don't, then please, I mean, that it's absolutely fine, because you know, there's so much to think about and you've got so much more to be doing today. So maybe this is something that you can do at a later stage. But if you have anything, I'll just give it 1 minute. Some of those other questions are really reflective as well. How are we doing? What evidence do we have? What is our goal? What are our barriers? You know, the whole stance that the IB has to inclusion is, where is the barrier? Get rid of it. So, did you have your hand up, Ian?
Yes, I would like to instruct participants here, if they are confused about the comment function. Before you make any comments, you can put a dot on Ms. Avi's screen. For example, if you want to put a dot here and comment on this, then that comment will be available. And if you want to comment on what evidence do we have, you can put a dot here. Okay, we have the first response now.
Yeah, use of technology for self-taught. Yeah, excellent. And also the support for the students while they're using the technology, right? Yeah. So I do encourage you to use this. Everyone who has access to the PRC has access to this document. You could use it as as a part of your collaborative planning process if you are focusing on inclusion at that time. And it could be something that could reinforce your policy at a later stage, or most of your schools will be going through evaluations in due course. So this could be something that feeds into your evaluation process. I'm just looking into not able to read this. Sorry, I think there's sort of interesting feedback here, but I'm okay. Yes, what are ideas? We celebrate our international community through various events and Spirit Week. Wonderful. That's a great start. Yes, the hidden part of the cultural iceberg. Yes, so those of us I would encourage you to look at that cultural iceberg model, which says that so much of culture and our assumptions is hidden deep behind what comes out to the surface. The way that we interact is not necessarily the way that we believe below us. Great answers. Thank you so much. And finally then, oops, I missed something. I'll go back. No, it's okay, I haven't missed it. So finally then, I would say, if our school was a house, how do we support our students? And how do we support our communities for sustainability, right to education, all of those areas, and inclusion? So really encouraging you to think about in PYP, the action component, services action in the MYP. What are we doing in CAS? What are we doing in the CP for service learning? And also to think about some areas where you could support the IB. For example, with the Festival of Hope. I'm not sure if many of you have seen this, but it's on the public website. And it is an initiative that has started in October of this year, and we're inviting schools to join us. So please have a look at the public website, and I would like very much Yipeng's help to help me to run the video so that we just get an idea of some of the things that we are hoping that our students will take agency on. So again, thank you very much for all your time. And after this video, we'll run some questions if you have time.
Minute by minute, breath by breath, we are witnessing one world giving way to the next. The awe-inspiring and staggering, the nearly invisible and the impossible to ignore. Even as we feel the ground beneath our feet could give way at any moment. It's never been so clear as it is now. that we have the power to shape our future. So ask yourself, who am I? But also, who are we? What gives the life we all share meaning? What do I want my legacy to be? What do we want our legacy to be? More promises of endless progress? Or something more tangible? Something transformational? How do we avoid repeating the same mistakes? You can choose what you do next, what you say next. Hope is always an act of resistance, an act of inquiry, from voices chanting in the streets to quiet acts of compassion between strangers. We can make every moment an opportunity to decide which vision of the world we stand for, which struggles we'll center, and how we'll come together to embody our shared experiences, advance our truths, to seek answers to the big questions that matter the most to you. Where do you see opportunities to act? What do you care about enough to fight for? To hope for? What is the world asking of you? These are our questions. This is our moment to rise.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you again, everyone. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to support. However, I think we still have a little bit of time. So yes, open for questions. But I do invite you to join us in the Festival of Hope. If you reach out on that website, you can contact the people who are involved. And if your schools would like to be involved, please do let us know.
No question. Thank you, Miss.
Thank you very much, all of you, for attending.
Okay.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Miss, thank you so much.
Bye.
So much.
Thank you, Miss.
Bye.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Miss.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you.
Please enjoy your conference.
You too, Miss.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss. Thank you, Miss. Thank you, Miss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy, for giving us such a wonderful and positive presentation. I feel so hopeful of our future now after listening to your presentation, and I miss going back to school. I want to go back to school now.
Me too. I wish I could be back in the school as well. That's where the opportunities are. Anyway, all the best and take care. I'll leave the meeting now.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
So I think we will go for early break, and our first session will start at 10 a.m. right? So yeah, thank you for all support and see you there.
Dear all,
thank you, Nanda.
Yeah, dear all the other sessions will not remain in this Zoom meeting. I have shared a PDF document in the participants WhatsApp group and by email as well. You will be able to join your chosen workshops by clicking directly into the student login link. Otherwise, if you have successfully registered for your workshops, you can go to your Classcipe account and then go to live workshops, scheduled, and click enter workshop from there. Yeah, thank you guys. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.